Hey guys, it's Adam from Lucy Pixel, and welcome back. Now, last week I spoke about DALL-E 2, which is an artificial intelligence, an AI software that can create imagery, original images, photographic, cartoon, illustrated, a bunch of different styles, very quickly and very convincingly, just using written criteria. So you can type in any crazy long description, and within seconds it'll pump out numerous different examples, different concepts based entirely off of artificial intelligence taken from the internet. And pretty impressive stuff, all things considered. Now, in last week's video, I shared my opinion. I shared an opinion, a personal one, where in the end I was very impressed with what it could create, but ultimately wasn't blown away by it, nor did I feel like it was a threat to my existence, to my career as an artist. Because human beings are so complex. Our feelings and thoughts, the relationships that we create with each other, the ways that we communicate, our cultural backgrounds, our moods, our diets, our climate, everything makes us who we are. And art is an expression of that, whether you're consciously or not consciously aware of it. And as you get older and you get more masterful, you get more skilled at your artistic craft, your art inevitably becomes more and more of a personal expression. So just slapping together random images does not make an artist. It makes an image. And it should be regarded as such in that sense. Because no, artificial intelligence is not sentient. I am. You are, right? Now that said, I still stand by that feeling. But well, a lot of you chimed in last week with every range of opinions, from completely agreeing with me to being on the fence to completely disagreeing with me. Some of you had even mentioned that DALL-E 2 is not the most recent version of imagery AI. There's apparently newer versions of stuff out there. And thank you for all those comments, by the way, because you guys really chimed in with a lot of good feedback. And then to add to that, my friend Elias, my good friend who we've done a video before in the past, he's the salsa king of Montreal. He owns a lot of salsa studios around Montreal. He called me on his back porch on a nice sunny day wearing sunglasses. He FaceTimed me. His kids were playing in the pool. And he said, Adam, I just saw your video. It was really, really cool. He said, but I want to challenge you. And he challenged me with the intention of playing devil's advocate. Adam, what if your lifelong achievement, your mastered skill set that you spent 4 decades learning, the schools you went to and the careers you've had and the people you've taught and all this kind of stuff, what if all of that became completely, utterly obsolete in a very short period of time? 5 years, 10 years, 15, who knows? But what if it became obsolete? And he threw a couple of examples at me, for instance, where other jobs that human beings have gotten used to doing manually are being automated. They're being replaced. He, for instance, is a Tesla driver. He has a nice Tesla car. I still drive an old beat-up, rusty Chevy SUV. I'm just counting the days. I keep waiting. I keep thinking every time I get in the car, I go, is this the big day? Is this the big one? Is it going to die today? But he's got this really cool fancy car, and he said, Adam, Tesla's just got this beta firmware update. And just to think a car getting a firmware update, it's pretty trippy just to think, just that in itself. But my Tesla got a firmware update, which is basically fully self-driving. And he updated it. He tested out the beta and he said, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to intervene anywhere. I'm just going to say, this is where I want to go. Go. And he watched the road. He paid attention as that car flawlessly drove from where he was to his destination. Stopping for people, following all of the traffic rules, driving the proper speed, turning perfectly, signaling perfectly, completely aware of everything around it, far more than he could ever be. And he said, Adam, honest to God, I have zero problem completely handing over my driving skill over to a car, handing it over to AI. I am completely comfortable with that. And I would have to agree with him. The moment GPS tracking became viable, when it actually became accurate and it actually was very usable and very reliable, I have given up my sense of direction when it came to driving. Directions be damned. I have no problem letting go of my friends or my mother's directions, saying, okay, remember when you get to the 3rd Street over there, when you get to the car, remember there's somebody has like a flamingo. It's kind of rusty. It's a flamingo on the front of his lawn. When you see that, you're going to drive 200 feet. And then you're going to make a sharp right. Don't drive off the cliff. You're going to make a sharp right. Look for the fence that has that little sticker on it that says, beware of dog. He doesn't actually have a dog. It's just puts there just to scare people. But it's a small sign. It's just at the beginning. And I'm sitting there going, no. I have no problem giving up that shit. Tell me where to go. Tell me to turn left. Tell me to turn right. I'll obey AI. I have no problem with that whatsoever. Okay? Same thing comes to driving. If I don't have to drive, I don't have an emotional connection to the act of driving. I like being in cars. I like going on trips. I love going on trips and going on drives with my kids is fun. We do this all the time. We'll just hop in the car and we'll have our one-to-one time driving around the neighborhood and stuff like that. It's fun. But holding the wheel, pressing the pedal, whatever. I don't think I'm going to miss that at all. But when it comes to art, that's a different story. To me, art is not just an intellectual activity. Art is not just a communication tool. Art is a physical activity that I love. It's a physical activity. I love the feeling of paint. I love the feeling of digital painting. I love the feeling of drawing. I love the feeling of rendering. I love the feeling of sculpting. I love the feeling of erasing. I love the act of creating an image. And I don't want to forfeit that. I don't want to give up the act of the brushstroke. To me, that's a very big part. That's the meditative part. That's when like I said in my review of soul arts this week, I put my headphones on, I click on Vadi videos, I start to listen to him, I get myself in a mood, I open up Pinterest, I open up Photoshop, and I start my painting. I love that feeling. I love that process. What you're watching me do right now, every brushstroke that I'm creating, everything that I'm doing right now, I love that process. To me, it's not labor. It's not exhausting. It's not annoying. It's not overwhelming. It's meditative. It's me. It's an extension of myself. And it's taken my whole life not just to realize what I want to draw, but how I want to draw it. To me, the feeling of the paint stroke, the feeling of the brush is as important to me as the image that I'm creating. I don't want to give that up. But what if I have no choice? What if 10, 15 years down the line, my phone stops ringing? Clients no longer feel the need to hire me because why? I can just pay a monthly subscription and get 4K high quality imagery that fits every criteria I'm looking for. And I can very quickly and very efficiently have full control over the final product. I get it exactly the way I want it, in the style that I want it. Why bother calling Adam? It's going to take too long. It's never going to be perfect. It's going to be full of human error because he's just a human being. And yeah, buddy, I'm sorry, but I don't really need your services anymore. What if that happens? How would I feel? Well, I can answer that from a place of experience. I've lived through that. I've spoken about it on my channel. I, from a very young age, all the way up until the end of university, had a linear focus of being a classical film animator. More specifically, a Disney classical film animator, but classical film animator in and of itself. That was my passion. That was my identity. This is what I was known as. Adam, the Disney guy. Adam, the cartoonist. This was my identity all through high school and college and university. and even before that, even elementary school. And I went through years and years of training, and I learned those skills, and I learned how to keep those volumes consistent, and I learned about follow through and overlapping action and stretch and squash and tempo and anatomy and physics of the human body and acting and facial expressions and the muscles of the face and expressiveness with the hands. And I just, the list goes on. I dedicated my entire life, and I would frame by frame Looney Tunes or Don Bluth videos or John Kay videos, and I would just sit there and frame by frame by frame by frame all those Disney films. And when a Disney film was going to come out, it was like an Apple event. I would be in that line first thing in the morning to get my ticket to go see it. I remember waiting in line for like 5-6 hours to go see Tarzan. I remember anticipating seeing Tarzan because it was a culmination of not only some of my favorite animation by Glenn Keane and by Disney in general, but it was also inspired by the movements of skateboarders, and I was a big skater. So for me, seeing how Glenn Keane had studied his son at the skate park and watching a lot of these pro skaters, how they moved to mimic that and animate that as Tarzan made his way through the vines, was just like, I have to see that. I have to experience that. And that was my identity. This was my passion. This was my life. And I got my degree. And I only had a few meager little years where I could manage to squeeze out any kind of work utilizing my design, my traditional drawing skills or my traditional animation skills, because it was that exact same time that that Toy Story had come out. And my job as an animator, as a traditional animator, in very large part became almost completely obsolete overnight. At least that's how I felt. And in many ways, it didn't become obsolete, but oh boy, did it take a swift kick to the nuts. And as I've expressed many times in the past, those job offerings vanished in front of my eyes. Huge studios that employed hundreds and even thousands of traditional animators, much more skilled than myself, because I was a newbie professional. I was new to the market. They weren't there. And back during the time where I was experiencing this mutiny on the animation industry, on the traditional animation industry, job searching was not online. Job searching was newspapers. So I could only look for jobs in the newspaper. I would usually buy the Wednesday or the Saturday newspaper, because those are the ones that had the biggest classified sections. They were the largest newspapers of the week. And I would go through it, and I would scan every single article, hoping that there was something for me. Looking for 2D artist, 2D illustrator, 2D designer, classical animator. And if I was lucky, there's maybe one or two. I was used to seeing 15, 20 posts a week. Now it was down to none, one, maybe two. And you can be pretty confident that those one or two jobs would get snagged by the more seasoned professionals, the ones with more experience. And I was not one of those guys. I had all the passion. I didn't have the skill. So I got a couple of little meager jobs. Meager enough, but good enough. But, I was a key 2D animator for a 3D game, a CD-ROM game. And then a couple of years later, I got hired as, or not even a couple of years later, maybe a year later, I got hired to work in the video game industry, where I worked on Monsters, Inc., and I worked on a game called Scalar and the 3D version of Pitfall. They were all games made in 3D, but I was hired to do key 2D frames or do character designs or environment designs or things like that. And I had work, but it was hard. And not only that, during that same period, when I first started, there was also a transition, not only in animation, but there was also a transition in traditional drawing, where we were going from traditional drawing on a piece of paper, drawing on an animation table, drawing on a canvas, painting on a canvas, to drawing on a tablet. And my workflow up until that point had been, I do my sketch on a piece of paper with the blue color erase pencil. Maybe I'd photocopy it or I'd send it through a scanner, and I freaking hated scanners. I'm so happy to be done with scanners. Scanners, printers, any of that kind of bullshit. Hated scanners, especially when you're doing animation. And that all transitioned into digital drawing tablets and Photoshop. And the early days of Photoshop, oh God, compared to what they are today, they weren't very elegant. They weren't very powerful. They were, you'd have to, doing line art was pretty much vector art, which is just absolute torture. Drawing lines in vector when you're a traditional artist is like, it's like pulling teeth. It's painful. And then you'd have to make sure all of your lines were closed, because if you had one pixel open, then you clicked on that paint bucket tool, your entire image would fill with paint. So you'd have to carefully zoom in and scan around the edges of every single line you drew and look for that stupid opening. Your bosses were always saying, close your lines, close your lines. I used to get shit for doing that kind of stuff. It was so freaking annoying. And just orienting myself, getting myself used to drawing on a tablet was a big pain in the ass. And the old drawing pens, the old Wacom's, were small and shitty. I was used to drawing on big sketchbooks with my pencil. And now I'm down to this little, 3x3 inch surface. It's just yuck. But slowly but surely, I adapted. I got used to it. But that wasn't good enough. I wasn't getting jobs. And eventually I got laid off. And I remember sitting there. I reached a point where nobody even wanted my traditional drawing skills. Nobody wanted any of that stuff. When you went into the newspaper, all you saw was 3D artist, 3D animator, 3D modeler, 3D rigger, 3D skinner, whatever. And for months, as I've described in the past, I just slammed the newspaper down. I said, I'm so sick and tired of this. Everybody wants freaking 3D. This is bullshit. And then I swallowed hard and I said, Adam, it's time to join the other team. Do or die. Sink or swim. Whether you either do something about it and you adapt to this evolution, to this evolving world we live in, or you starve to death and you have no independence. You're going to have bills collect. You're going to be hungry. You're going to live with mommy for the rest of your life. No, you got to do something about it. I didn't want to go back to school, so I originally got a book in Softimage and tried that book, but it was written by the worst writers imaginable. Basically, how to animate for programmers. It was not an artistic pipeline. I threw that book physically, literally frisbeed it out of my window, off my second floor window, and I went and I got myself a book on learning Maya for beginner to intermediate. And it was fantastically written. I got myself an illegal copy of Maya. Don't hate me. And I spent about 4 to 6 months learning how to model, rig, skin, light, use particle effects, and all that kind of stuff. And when it was all done, for the first time, I animated. And I learned something very profound at that very, very important moment. Rigging, skinning, modeling, lighting, or doing cloth simulation or particle effects, all of that stuff was just learning the tool, just like learning how to use a Wacom tablet, learning Photoshop, learning any software. It's just a software. But when it came to animating, that's where my skill took over. That's where my artistic training took charge. And I realized at the same time, I've got a huge advantage in this industry. Because when I worked on those original games that I worked on, these original studios that I worked in, where I helped to design and do and provide keyframes for the 3D modelers to animate, because they were the only ones that knew how to use the 3D software. I literally had to sit down and baby them through the entire process of animating. Okay, take this foot, put it over here. Okay, move to this frame, take that finger, move it over here, turn the wrist like this, turn the waist like that. Oh, remember that the movement starts at the core. And I'm literally babying them and tutoring them through the entire process of animating, because all they knew was the software. They didn't know how to animate. They didn't understand the physics of movement and body language and facial expression. And once I got to that point where I was animating, I took off. And between that point and having a finished animation reel, having an animation demo that I could provide to studios was probably around a 2-week period. And it was advanced animation. It was professional animation. It wasn't programmer animation, right? And I applied and I got a job the day before I applied it. You know, people were like lining up to hire me because, oh my God, this guy's an animator who knows 3D. This is such a big deal. And getting a job, piece of cake. I was hired on the spot. And I remember the first job I got hired as an animator was, ironically, in Softimage. I was like, okay, well, I learned Maya. I learned Softimage, and then I dumped that and learned Maya, and then they hired me in Softimage. But I realized it didn't matter because 3D animating was animating. Learning the other logistics of a software was a slightly different story. But when it came to animating, it's just setting keyframes, all the in-betweens, all that labor-intensive in-between shit, which was what I would compare to the driving aspect of driving or the GPS version of directions. The in-betweens, I had no qualms about letting that shit go. I definitely wanted control over the keyframes. I definitely wanted control over the breakdowns. And if I needed a little bit of granular control, yes, I liked to tween as well. But all those frickin' drawings and all that cleanup art, and if you're doing cell and like painting cells, that hugely labor-intensive job of coloring an animation cell, oh, I can live without that. I could live without that. And I got hired. And I got hired in Softimage. And I'm on my first week in the job, and I'm working alongside a couple of other not bad animators, but they didn't have my animation background. They didn't have my classical animation background. So I'm working with these characters, and I'm animating these characters for these different scenes. And within 20 minutes of working in my first job in animation, I realized these rigs, no offense to the people who rigged it back in the time, because we're talking about the early days of 3D animation, these rigs suck. I can't move these characters anywhere. And furthermore, the animation that I saw, the animations that I'd seen done for this game were really bad. I mean, they were really stiff, you know, and the oversized limbs that were hard to animate and stuff like that. And they were just really key to, there's like, you know, here's two keyframes, make it move between those two spots. There was no feeling, there was no weight, there was no gesture. It was just a movement, you know, here, movement achieved, move on to the next project. And I was like, no. I have a far higher standard. I've got classical animation. So I decided since I knew rigging, I went right into that rig and I started to break apart certain connections so I could stretch things out and I could morph things. I didn't give a shit what I was doing to that model. I wanted that to look good. I didn't care if the foot was going through the floor. I didn't care if the polygons were overlapping. I wanted that thing to feel rubbery and plasticky and weighted and animated, and I wanted to feel that movement. And I completed my first 3-4 scenes, and my boss came up to me and said, "Adam, you can't do that to the rig, to the models. You really can't do that to the models. You know that. We can't do that. You're kind of breaking the rules." And I said, okay, I know I'm new to this job. I don't want to piss you off. I don't want to bite the hand that feeds me, but look at that scene. Look at the final render of that scene. Tell me what tell me if you like that or not. And he didn't say anything. I said, what do you think? What do you think of it? How does it look to you? And he said, it's pretty good. I said, I said, lesson number 1. I didn't say that. That was very don't say that to your boss. It's a very condescending. I said, animation is about movement. It's about gesture. It's about expression. And I said, I don't care what I need. I don't care what it takes to get that character to move the way I want it to move. And these are you move forward in film and you get things like Elastigirl. You get Pixar level of rigging and stuff like that, right? This was pre-Elastigirl. I was breaking the rules. I was cheating. I was doing things that these models were not designed to do, but I didn't give a shit because to me, the artistic expression was the thing that mattered. And he got a lot of praise. That company got a lot of praise for the animations that I did. People noted it. I went online, I checked out forums, I was listening to how people were responding to the games. They were saying, oh my God, the animations are so good, and the way the characters move, and they're funny, and my kids are laughing, and I'm like, yes, that's what I wanted. That's what mattered. And I realized I could do this. If I can apply myself, if I can apply my artistic skill, if I can apply my personal touch, my need to express myself in my own way to this craft, I might be able to sacrifice. I'm going to have to sacrifice to get myself employed, but I'm going to make sure that it lives up to a standard that allows me to feel good about myself at the end of the day. That I'm not just lowering my bar so that I can give in to some software. And years later, I mean, I didn't end up staying in 3D. I could have if I wanted to. I got other jobs. I got hired as a director because I had the skill in 2D and 3D, which was a very valuable asset at the time. So that's what got me direction jobs early on in my career too. And ironically, because I was the only 2D guy in a studio, I got hired to do a lot of 2D design work too, even though I was hired to do 3D. So that was kind of a nice perk. But at a certain point, as I've described in my videos in the past, my heart wasn't in it. My heart wasn't there. And I really, when I sat down with fellow 2D artists and fellow 2D animators and at this point concept artists and illustrators, which I started getting into because tablets and Photoshop were really advancing at that point, I realized I gotta do that. It's still a part of my DNA. I still miss the feeling of drawing. And traditional art, thankfully traditional illustration and fantasy art, when I started to realize, oh my God, there are still jobs in this kind of stuff, people are getting hired to do that, digital painting, it was really a no-brainer. And I thought, you know what, as Jim Carrey says, you can fail at doing the thing you don't want to do, so you might as well give it a chance and do the thing you do. And I've gotten jobs and I dealt with layoffs and all that shit that many of you might be familiar with in your own career. And I said, I need to rebrand myself. And I made a brand new website, completely separate from my 3D animation website. It was an exclusively fantasy illustration website. And I updated my CV and I updated my portfolio and I started to look for jobs as a traditional artist. And it was a little bit tricky at first, or at least traditional digital painter, 2D artist. But thankfully, one of the things that was happening at the time, and one of the things that was an incentive for me to give this a shot, was the fact that as an artist, as an animator, as a teacher, I had experienced the fact that although 3D was important and it was there to stay and it was valuable and it was really cool and things that some people could pull off was really artistic and really impressive, traditional 2D animation and digital painting and traditional art really resonated strongly with the audiences. When I would, for instance, at the CGIP the college that I taught at in animation, there would be 2D and 3D. And the 3D animation was excellent. It was professional. It was impressive. It was very artistic. I noticed that the traditional animation, the 2D animation gala that would be hosted one of those 2 days, more often than not, got a somewhat stronger emotional reaction. There was something very organic. There was something very human. There was something very personalized about the quality of that line, of the style of that artist, the way they drew, the way they expressed themselves. There was something special, something you can't get out of 3D that only existed in that 2D art, that 2D animation. And that built inside me, that realization built inside me to the point where I got the balls, I got the courage to say, I'm doing this. And I did it. And there was a bit of a struggle. There was a bit of an adaptation. I depended on some leaps of faith from certain employers because I didn't have a lot of 2D experience. There was a big gap where I'd worked exclusively in 3D and direction. So a couple of employers gave me a chance, and I slowly built up my CV and slowly built up my portfolio until I started to get more regular work. And then I got hired to teach more at the animation studio, at the animation college, and teaching 2D and 3D animation was an absolutely wonderful experience. My home away from home, as I've described in the past. But I've committed myself to 2D animation since. So, that's it. What if 2D illustration goes bye-bye? Or at least, what if this AI really becomes a mainstream thing? What the hell am I going to do? What are you going to do? What are we going to do as an artistic community? This is an entire community of artists that have been completely dumped out on the side of the road. They say, thank you for your services, take care, and then poof, they take off and they leave us in the middle of some barren wasteland to fend for ourselves. What do we do then? Well, hopefully I've already answered that question. You adapt. You evolve. And don't underestimate the power of starvation. When you're desperate, when you're hungry for employment, when you're hungry to pay your bills, when you're looking at your little kids and their big eyes and their gray faces from malnourishment, you'll kick into action real quick. And you will learn how to take your existing skills and adapt them into this new ecosystem. And if you're smart about it, you'll start picking up on it early. You'll start adapting early so that your unique artistic skill set, those fundamental artistic skills that you spent your entire life learning, are going to become your greatest asset in this new profession. And you will be able, just like I did in 3D animation, you'll be able to pick apart the weaknesses. You'll be able to pick apart the flaws, and you will be able to contribute in the most profound way to the growth and evolution of this new tool, so that it becomes something that's more valuable, more worthwhile, more usable, more meaningful, more expressive to the artistic community. Because the only way that artificial intelligence could replace human beings, the only way it could, is if it could truly create art. And the only way it can truly create art is if it's being controlled by, it's being governed by, it's being used by, it's being developed by artists. Remember, art is a product of us and not the other way around. Art exists because we exist. And our desire for artistic expression, our desire for artistic creation is purely a manifestation of human desire. Period. It has been since the cavemen, hasn't it? You go deep inside these claustrophobic caves and you find art by versions of us humans that predate us by millions and millions of years. And if and when AI really becomes a really serious business thing, and people are saying, dude, you're going to find yourself out of a job unless you do something about it, I will adapt. I will join that team, and I will stand at the helm of that future of AI as a leader, as somebody who's got years of experience. You have this advantage. You've been to school. You've learned these artistic fundamentals. Your abilities are a huge asset to the future of art. Don't take that for granted. Your job won't be replaced. Your job will evolve if you're smart. But if you want to be some purist, if you want to be some traditionalist and say, no, AI is garbage, it's not real, it sucks and everything like that, and nobody's calling you and nobody's giving you a job, well, whose loss is that? It's ultimately going to be your loss. You have to do something about it. And if you look through the history of artists, I look at artists of our generation, one artist in particular who I hold probably in the highest regard, who I mention at least once in every single video that I produce, Zdzisław Beksiński, right? If you look up Zdzisław Beksiński art, you're going to notice that apart from his absolutely gorgeous paintings, you're going to notice as well some kind of cringy looking Photoshop images that look like they might have been done in the style of Beksinski. And you're kind of sitting there going, whoever did that didn't get Beksinski. And you realize, no, that was done by Beksinski. Towards the end of his life, before he was unfortunately murdered, he was very, very excited with Photoshop. When he discovered Photoshop for the first time, he jumped into it almost immediately. But Photoshop had not reached, it wasn't as advanced, as capable a software as it is today. So he started to produce imagery in Photoshop. Why? Well, because when he originally started his career, he started as a photographer. And when the photography industry wasn't doing it for him, he got into painting and illustration. But later on in his life, once Photoshop came out, he immediately jumped on board. He could mix photography and illustration, and he could photo bash it together to create these imagery. Had he lived to today, he could have very well, because he died before his time. But had he lived today, I guarantee you he would be producing digital art. But at the time, it just didn't live up to the quality that you could get from traditional oil painting, so he just went back to painting again, because his fans were going, dude, no, this is cringy shit. It doesn't live up to your standard. So he went back. But he still was an artist at the top of his game, who was completely and utterly willing to try something out completely new. And you don't have a prejudice, don't have a bias against modern technology, because it's just a tool. And if you can master that tool from the perspective of an artist, then you could very well find yourself, especially today, in a very, very advantageous position. But don't let that train get away. Jump on board as soon as you get the chance. And if it doesn't, well, then keep on drawing. None lost, right? With that said, of course, I love you all with all my heart. Thank you for listening. And I'll see you in the next video. Take care.